Transition towns are a way that local communities get together and try and react positively to climate change, which everyone knows about, and peak oil, which is the idea that cheap and readily available oil will be a thing of the past, and that there'll be issues about resources that will affect our society. So they, instead of kind of running away in horror at this awful prospect, transition towns try to organise themselves so that they'll be able to deal with those challenges in a positive way, and at the same time have a greater sense of community. So one of the things I've learned after doing this for 2 years is how important community is. I went into the process thinking very much about skills that people need to learn. People do need to relearn skills that their grandparents may have had. But over the 2 years, it's what's really exciting about it is just people getting to know each other again. I really feel very connected with my area now, just because of having to do this work, making connections with different groups that are physically based nearby. It's intrinsically really enjoyable. So even if climate change and peak oil didn't exist, I still prefer working towards this kind of life. We have a core group of people who try and keep the vision alive, sometimes with more success than others. And then there are some working groups. So what we do is very project focused. There's a growing group and we have 7 different growing sites in the N4 area. So transition towns are very much about your own local area, the area that you feel comfortably is yours. So in a city, it's going to be like a sub-district. So in Finsbury Park, we're just looking at the N4 postal area. So in public places around N4, there's like at the library and outside a church and outside a train station and in the park, there are various different growing projects to make it very easy for people to learn about how to grow food, and also just give people practical experience, give them ownership over a project where they may not have their own growing space. And we're also starting a community nursery that will be growing edible perennials so that people can work towards a more sustainable type of gardening that is low maintenance and high yielding, as opposed to the planting of annual veg, which is very high maintenance and can be disheartening for people who aren't familiar with growing. As well as the growing group, which is probably the largest area, there's a buildings and energy group that is trying to help people make their homes more energy efficient, a transport group that is really just focusing on encouraging cycling. So at the moment there's a project going on at a local primary school where we're training mums who have children who want to learn to ride themselves, so that they're more likely to become a cycling family. And then there's a skill building group that is mostly knitting. There's a bit of cob building going on as well. It's this low embodied energy type of building where you build with clay and straw, and it's a traditional building method that people are quite interested in getting their hands dirty on. And then there's various inner transition things going on as well. When I say inner transition, I'm acknowledging that in order for society to change, there's physical changes that need to be made, which are all these projects, which are manifestations of what we're trying to do. But then there's the inner transition as well, which is coming to terms with change in an emotional way or in a spiritual way, so that you can deal with it better and be more resilient, more kind of strong within yourself. So we have a meditation group and a yoga group. Also coordinate the Macy Mondays, which use the work of Joanna Macy to support environmental activists across North London. So it's a very trusting group that is helping us avoid burnout, because obviously it's very demanding running this kind of project. To my understanding is that it was mostly Rob Hopkins' fault, and he's this guy who, I think he used to be a lecturer in permaculture, and permaculture is this approach it comes from permanent agriculture, but it's actually an approach to life that it's quite hard to summarise, but it's kind of looking at any project in terms of the inputs and the outputs, having minimal effort, high yields, preserving nature and trying to copy what nature does in our own systems and our own projects. So anyway, he was interested in that. He came across the issues of peak oil and climate change, I think mostly climate change initially, and then decided that he would like to try doing something where he was working and living over in Ireland in Kinsale. and started a transition town that was very much based in an educational place. And then he moved to Totnes in Devon and started the first kind of town-wide transition town, which has been going since, I think, 2006. Their most established transition town, and then since then it's kind of spread so that there's hundreds of transition initiatives that are mulling over, which means that they're thinking about becoming one, and then there's hundreds of official ones as well. So Finsbury Park is the 191st official, and it's also spread to be an international thing, so there's transition towns in America and New Zealand and in Europe and Italy. Well, Italy's part of Europe. So yeah, it's a worldwide movement,
Okay.
and I think generally people are attracted towards it because it is a positive way of reacting to the crises that we could be facing, but also it meets a need that people have to build their own communities. Everyone's attracted by that idea.
Yeah. Okay.
Peak oil is, people sometimes think that it's talking about running out of oil and that we're suddenly going to stop having oil, but it's not that at all. It's to do with the ease of supply and the price of oil. So when you discover an oil field, initially you can't stop the stuff coming out. It kind of gushes out, and the best thing you can do is try and capture it, And then the oil supply gradually slows down, and then you have to start using more effort to get the last oil out until you're putting in a lot of effort, and then at that point it becomes uneconomical to get that oil out. So that kind of pattern of discovering an oil well, having plenty of energy coming from that field, and then having to put more energy in than you're getting out, it describes a bell curve like that. And the point of the top of the curve, that would be the peak. And if you look at all of the different oil fields in the world, when we talk about peak oil, we're saying that those oil fields have peaked in their production. So you are still getting oil out, but it's harder to get and it's more expensive. Most of the oil wells that we know about, because the information is available, have already peaked. And then there's other oil wells that we don't know about because the information is kept sort of secret. I'm not a big peak oil expert, but I think the Middle East oil fields are not known about because, for political reasons, something to do with OPEC, the information is kept secret. So I think those countries had to declare what their reserves were, and there was some kind of reason why it was financially advantageous for them to say they had more than they actually had, but I don't really know the ins and the outs of it. But what that means is that we don't know whether they've peaked or not. But if they're anything like any of the other oil fields, then yes, they have done. Once oil starts becoming more expensive, much more expensive to get out of the ground, obviously the price goes up, and that will have an effect on just about everything that we currently do, because we use oil to make things, we use oil to transport things, we use oil in food production, things like agricultural fertilisers and pesticides need oil. Our whole economy is based on it. Our whole global economy is based on it, and so once you start making it more expensive, then it has a massive effect on everyone. Well, although poor people first become affected, and climate change as well will have the biggest effect on those who are sort of least haven't got that big cushion of money around them like we in the West have. It's pretty scary stuff, and quite hard to hit people with if you're just meeting someone at an event. What we did at our festival this year, which was called Well Oiled, the main part of the festival was a lot of fun stuff. So we had a climbing wall and lots of stuff aimed at families, so like a family bike ride and junk modelling, and there was weaving looms that children could try out and all sorts of practical stuff. There was also an art installation along Parkland Walk, which is just next to the park, and it had information about peak oil and climate change, along with a series of installations looking at the 5 different stages that people go through when they engage with something life-changing like the knowledge of peak oil and climate change. They're the stages that people go through when they go through grief, which I think are denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance. And we added on active action as well at the end. Alex Head, our local artist, put this beautiful installation along Parkland Walk so that people could kind of look at those issues in a nice sort of calm setting. And then at the other end of Parkland Walk, up at Highgate, there was a tent set up by the HICAN group, Highbury Climate Action Network. So that was meant to be the place where people could, chill out after going through that journey. After the event, Alex gave one of the heads to each of the participants. So this is my one, which I keep on my desk. Although I think it's meant to be nailed into a wall somewhere.
Oh, right.
We tend to focus more on what we're actually doing to explain. We tend to say we're trying to make the area better, and everyone can see the wisdom of having more food that's grown locally. So it's quite easy to engage people. So my moment of becoming active in the environmental stuff, it came about a year after my first child was born, and I read an article in New Scientist that was looking at all of the different possible scenarios if climate change was true. So, for example, the trapped methane under the ocean, the sort of the bubbles that how long if the temperature got to a certain point, what would happen if all that methane was released. All those different things, and giving a kind of a very rough idea of the time scale when the scientists say the earliest it could happen or the latest it could happen. And I read all of this and then actually thought, what if this actually is true? Then this could actually start affecting my children's life. It could start having an effect during my children's lifetime. So it immediately became more relevant. So I left my job. I was working for a training company. Started volunteering for Greenpeace, working on their magazine, Big Greenpeace Business. And then I got that turned into a paid position. Then I had my second child. And while this was going on, I started investigating the idea of moving out of London. So my initial response was to run away and become self-sufficient and learn all those skills myself. And then I found out about permaculture. I think I started subscribing to Permaculture magazine and read an article about Transition Lewis, which is one of the ones that after Totnes was formed, Lewis, I think, was one of the first towns to start being a transition town next. And my brother had just moved to Lewis, and so I read this article with great interest. And I was also looking at an intentional community that was based in Totnes. So I was visiting the town quite a lot. And then by the time I went along to a talk in November 2008 about transition towns, I was kind of ready to try it out in London. And I also had some fairly important conversations with people who ended up being on the steering group about peak oil and climate change about that time. So it was just that realisation that there were people I actually knew who could end up being part of the project and who were interested, that made me believe in the idea of doing it in a city as well, rather than just going to the countryside. And food foraging, one of the most enjoyable things this year for me has been increasing my knowledge of different wild foods you can eat. I've been teaming up with Gemma Harris from Sustainable Haringey and Urban Harvest, who's pretty knowledgeable about wild foods, and we've been going on a few walks. Also, I mentioned someone earlier on who was important in starting the whole group off, and that was Martin, the local vicar. Well, his wife is a landscape architect, Jen, and she is really interested in food foraging as well, and also making jam and chutneys and various different preserves. And so between us, we've done quite a lot of foraging this year and processed foods. And so there's been, the jams, the chutneys, the herbs, the pestos and that kind of thing. But there's also been things like fruit leathers. So Gemma's been experimenting with, she bought a dryer this year and has made an enormous number of different types of fruit leather. And so now I'm beginning to think, if I did that, I wouldn't need to buy any dried fruit at all. I could just use foraged fruit. And when Gemma makes it, she doesn't even add sugar. So she's just using the natural fruit as its own preservative in a way, which is brilliant because I spend quite a lot of money. I bulk buy food from Infinity Foods, and it's not cheap buying loads of dried apricots and stuff. If I can just use stuff that's growing on my street, then it's 100 times better. My children have really enjoyed it as well, so they're kind of plant geeks, slightly. So it's been really good fun. It's really nice.